They found a watch worth more than their entire lives combined buried in someone else's trash. And for one long, frozen minute, Emily Carter wondered if honesty was a luxury people like them could even afford. The wind cut across the empty lot like a blade made of ice, rattling the thin aluminum walls of the trailer they called home on the edge of Dayton, Ohio. It was barely 6 in the morning, the sky still bruised purple before sunrise, and Emily's breath rose in pale clouds as she tightened the straps on her worn work gloves. At 19, her hands already looked older skin, rough from hauling trash bags that sometimes weighed over 40 pounds. Beside her stood her little sister, Lily Carter, 14 and too thin for the oversized reflective vest hanging off her shoulders, her blonde hair tucked under a faded knit cap. They moved methodically from bin to bin behind a row of upscale houses, collecting what other people threw away without thinking. The wealthy neighborhood smelled faintly of pine and expensive detergent, nothing like the sour dampness near their trailer park. Emily lifted a heavy black bag and felt something solid shift inside. Not broken glass, not a food container, something heavier, deliberate. She crouched, sliced the knot open carefully, and there it was, resting against coffee grounds and paper towels, a silver watch with a deep blue face, pristine, flawless, the kind she had only seen in jewelry store windows at the mall. Even in the dim morning light, it gleamed like it didn't belong to this world, or theirs. Lily whispered that it could pay for Mom's hospital bills, maybe even the overdue electric. Emily swallowed hard, staring at the name engraved on the back, knowing that one choice in this freezing driveway could change everything about who they were. Emily turned the watch over in her gloved hands, the metal cold against her fingertips, even through the worn fabric, and for a brief, reckless second, she imagined what it would feel like to walk into the hospital billing office and place it on the counter like a miracle. The engraving on the back was simple and precise, Jonathan Whitmore, and beneath it a date from nearly 10 years ago. Lily shifted her weight from one boot to the other, her stomach growling softly in the quiet morning, and whispered that maybe whoever lost it would never even notice. The houses around them stood tall and silent, 3 car garages, trimmed hedges, warm yellow lights glowing behind spotless windows. Inside those walls, people probably woke up to fresh coffee and heated floors. Inside their trailer, the heat had been off for 2 nights, because the propane tank was almost empty. Emily tied the trash bag back up, carefully slipped the watch into the front pocket of her heavy coat, and forced herself to breathe slowly. They finished the route in silence, hauling the last bins to the curb and securing the lids against the wind. By the time they pushed their dented pickup truck back onto the narrow county road, the sun was rising pale over frozen cornfields stretching for miles. Lily finally asked what they were going to do, her voice small but hopeful. Emily kept her eyes on the cracked windshield and said they were going to find the address connected to that name. She did not say it out loud, but she knew that returning it would mean choosing hunger over comfort, at least for now. And still something inside her told her that keeping it would cost them far more than any hospital bill ever could. By the time they pulled into the gravel driveway of their trailer, the morning sun had climbed higher, but brought no real warmth, only a thin, pale light that made everything look more exposed. Emily parked the truck beside the leaning mailbox and sat there for a moment with the engine off, listening to the ticking metal cool down under the hood. Inside the trailer, their mother lay on the couch beneath 2 layered blankets. Her breathing shallow but steady, a stack of unpaid hospital envelopes resting on the small folding table nearby. The air smelled faintly of instant coffee and antiseptic. Lily slipped inside first to check on her, moving carefully, so the floor would not creak too loudly. Emily stayed outside and pulled the watch from her coat pocket again, studying the flawless glass face the way the second hand moved with precise, confident clicks, as if time itself obeyed it. She imagined the kind of man who would wear something like this, someone whose decisions moved markets and whose name might be printed in business magazines. She also imagined the pharmacy receipt folded in her back pocket, the one she had not shown Lily, the one that listed medication their insurance no longer covered. For a heartbeat, she pressed the cold metal against her forehead and closed her eyes. It would be so easy to sell it quietly in a pawn shop 30 miles away, where nobody knew them. No one would question two girls from a trailer park. But when she looked up at the wide Ohio sky stretching over the empty fields, she felt something stronger than fear or hunger. She walked back inside, placed the watch on the kitchen counter beneath the weak overhead light, and told Lily they were going to return it today no matter what it cost. They borrowed the neighbor's old smartphone to search the name engraved on the back of the watch, and within seconds, the screen filled with articles about Jonathan Whitmore, a technology billionaire whose headquarters towered over downtown Dayton like a monument made of glass and steel. Emily felt Lily move closer to her shoulder as images of charity galas, corporate conferences, and magazine covers scrolled past. The address of his private residence appeared in a business profile located in the same upscale neighborhood where they had collected trash that morning. It felt almost unreal that something so valuable had been thrown away only 3 miles from their trailer. Emily wrapped the watch carefully in a clean dish towel and placed it inside a small cardboard box, as if protecting something fragile and sacred. They washed their hands, changed into their only decent clothes, and brushed their hair in the small bathroom mirror cracked along one corner. The drive back toward the wealthy neighborhood felt longer than before, the pickup truck rattling over potholes as if protesting their decision. When the gates of the Whitmore estate came into view, tall black iron bars rising at least 8 feet high, Lily's fingers tightened around the edge of her seat. Beyond the gate stretched a manicured driveway, curving toward a massive white stone mansion with tall columns and perfectly trimmed hedges lining both sides like silent guards. Emily parked on the side of the road because their truck did not belong inside those gates. She stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, her boots crunching on gravel, and walked toward the intercom mounted on a polished stone pillar. Her reflection looked small against the smooth marble surface. She pressed the button with a steady finger and stated her name, clearly explaining that they had found something that belonged to Mr. Whitmore. There was a pause long enough to make her question everything. Then a cool, unfamiliar voice responded that they should wait. The gates did not open, but somewhere inside the estate someone had started paying attention. 2 security guards in dark uniforms approached from inside the gate, their polished shoes moving silently over the stone driveway, as the iron bars finally slid open just wide enough for conversation, but not for entry. Emily stood straight, despite the cold pressing through her thin jacket, holding the small cardboard box carefully in both hands. One of the guards, a tall man with a clipped tone, asked how they had obtained Mr. Whitmore's name and why they were here. Emily explained calmly that they worked the sanitation route in the area and had found something important in one of the collection bins. Lily remained close beside her, her fingers lightly gripping the sleeve of Emily's coat, eyes wide, as she took in the towering columns of the mansion and the luxury vehicles parked in a semicircle near the entrance. The second guard's gaze shifted from their worn boots to the dented pickup truck parked along the road, measuring them without speaking. Emily felt the weight of that look, but did not lower her eyes. She lifted the lid of the box just enough to reveal the gleam of silver and deep blue beneath the folded towel. The reaction was immediate, subtle but unmistakable, a quick exchange of glances between the guards. One of them spoke quietly into a small radio clipped to his collar, requesting confirmation. The minutes stretched long in the crisp afternoon air. Cars passed occasionally on the road behind them, slowing slightly as drivers glanced at the unusual scene. Finally, the guard received a response and nodded once. He informed them that Mr. Whitmore was aware of the situation and would see them personally. The gates opened wider this time, the metal sliding back with a low mechanical hum that sounded almost ceremonial. Emily swallowed her nerves and stepped forward onto the immaculate driveway, every footstep echoing faintly against the stone. As they walked toward the grand entrance, Lily whispered that maybe this was the moment everything would change. Emily did not answer, because she knew that sometimes change did not arrive with kindness first, but with questions. The front doors of the mansion stood nearly 12 feet tall, carved from dark wood that gleamed under the afternoon light, and when they opened, the air inside felt warmer and scented faintly with polished oak and something subtle and expensive. Emily stepped across the threshold with careful, measured movements, conscious of the faint scuff marks on her boots against the spotless marble floor. Lily stayed close, her eyes moving from the sweeping staircase to the crystal chandelier suspended high above, like a frozen waterfall of light. A man stood near the center of the vast entry hall, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, silver hair brushed neatly back, posture straight without effort. Jonathan Whitmore did not raise his voice or step forward immediately. He simply watched them with a calm, assessing expression that revealed nothing. Emily felt the silence press against her ribs, but forced herself to move closer, extending the small cardboard box with steady hands. She introduced herself and Lily, clearly explaining that they had found something on their sanitation route that morning and believed it belonged to him. Jonathan's eyes shifted briefly to the box, then back to Emily's face as if weighing more than the object inside. He accepted the box without a word and unfolded the towel, slowly revealing the silver watch resting in his palm. The faint ticking sound seemed louder in the quiet room. For the first time, a flicker crossed his composed expression, something that looked like recognition mixed with disbelief. He examined the engraving, then glanced toward one of the security monitors mounted discreetly near the hallway, as if confirming a private thought. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled, but cool, asking where exactly they had found it, and why they had decided to bring it back instead of selling it. The question hung in the air, not accusatory, but heavy with implication. Emily met his gaze directly and answered that it was never theirs to keep. Lily nodded beside her, silent but unwavering. Jonathan studied them both for several seconds longer, his eyes thoughtful, searching as if trying to determine whether honesty could truly look this ordinary. Jonathan Whitmore turned the watch slowly between his fingers, the polished metal catching the chandelier light in brief flashes, and although his expression remained composed, something colder settled behind his eyes. He asked them again to describe precisely which trash bin they had found it in and at what time. Emily repeated the details carefully, naming the street, the position of the house on the corner lot, and the approximate hour just after 6 in the morning. Jonathan listened without interruption, then walked toward a sleek console along the wall where several security monitors displayed live and recorded footage from different angles around the property. He pressed a button and scrolled through clips from the previous evening, stopping at the moment when a staff member carried a small black bag toward the curb. The camera showed the bag placed beside the recycling bin, then the footage ended. Jonathan's jaw tightened slightly. He asked whether anyone else had approached the bag before they collected it. Emily shook her head and said no, explaining that they handled every bag themselves on that route. Lily added softly that the bag had been tied shut when they found it. Jonathan's gaze returned to them, thoughtful but guarded. He mentioned that the watch had been reported missing the night before, and that it held personal significance. There was no accusation in his tone, yet the implication lingered, as if he were testing whether their story would shift under pressure. Emily felt her heartbeat in her ears, but refused to let her voice waver. She stated plainly that if he believed they had taken it intentionally, he could check any available footage from the sanitation truck's dash camera, because they had nothing to hide. The suggestion seemed to surprise him. For a brief moment, the room fell completely silent except for the faint ticking of the watch still in his hand. Then Jonathan instructed one of the guards to retrieve additional footage from the exterior cameras along the street. As the guard left the hall, Emily sensed that the next few minutes would determine whether honesty would protect them or place them under suspicion. The guard returned with a tablet displaying additional security footage pulled from cameras mounted along the outer perimeter of the estate and neighboring streetlights. Jonathan stood beside a long marble table and motioned for Emily and Lily to come closer, his posture controlled but distant. The screen showed the quiet residential street just after dawn, the sky still dim and gray. A sanitation truck rolled slowly into view, its headlights faint in the early light. Emily recognized the dent along the side panel and the small company logo printed near the rear. She felt Lily's hand brush against hers, both of them watching their own movements recorded from a distance. The footage showed Emily stepping down from the truck, lifting bags one by one with deliberate care, then pausing briefly as she examined the heavier black bag. There was no hesitation beyond curiosity, no attempt to conceal anything, no hurried glance over her shoulder. The camera captured her slicing the knot, discovering the watch, and standing still for a long second, before placing it carefully into her coat pocket. Lily appeared beside her, speaking softly. Then both of them finished loading the remaining bags and drove away, without any sign of secrecy. Jonathan watched the recording twice without comment. The faint ticking of the watch in his hand seemed louder in the otherwise silent hall. Finally, he turned off the screen and looked directly at them. There was no longer suspicion in his expression, but something more complex, a quiet recalculation. He acknowledged that the footage confirmed their account, and that they had made no attempt to hide what they found. Yet his next words carried weight. He said that people often returned valuable items expecting recognition or reward, and he wanted to understand what they hoped to gain by coming here. Emily felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice steady as she answered that they did not come for anything, except to return what did not belong to them. Lily nodded again, her thin shoulders squared despite the intimidating room around them. Jonathan studied their faces in silence, as if measuring whether integrity could truly exist without expectation, and the tension in the room shifted from suspicion to something far more personal. Jonathan Whitmore placed the tablet down slowly on the marble surface, the soft click echoing faintly through the vast entry hall. And for several long seconds, he said nothing at all. Emily could feel the weight of the chandelier light above them, the warmth of the heated floors beneath her boots, and the invisible line that separated their world from his. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but sharpened by experience. He said that in his position, he had learned that very few actions were without motive, and that even honesty often carried expectation. He stepped closer, not threatening, but deliberate, and asked again whether they were absolutely certain they did not want compensation. The word lingered in the air like a test. Emily felt Lily's fingers press lightly into her sleeve, a reminder of the unpaid bills resting on their kitchen table, of the propane tank, nearly empty, of their mother's quiet cough in the dim trailer. For a brief second, the image of the hospital statement flashed through her mind, the total circled in red ink, more money than she had ever seen in one place. She could almost hear the relief in her mother's voice if they returned home with a check. But she also remembered the feeling of that cold metal against her forehead that morning, the silent promise she had made to herself under the Ohio sky. She lifted her chin and answered that they did not expect anything. They had come because it was the right thing to do. Lily added in a small but steady voice that their mother had always told them that you can lose money and find it again, but once you lose your character, it does not come back the same. Jonathan's expression shifted almost imperceptibly at those words. He turned the watch over in his hand once more, his thumb brushing across the engraved date, and something unreadable moved behind his eyes. Instead of offering gratitude, he surprised them by asking one of the guards to contact local authorities to document the return formally. The request was procedural. He explained a standard verification process when high-value items were involved, yet the implication struck like cold water. Lily's breath caught softly. Emily felt her pulse quicken, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she understood how easily truth could become complicated in rooms like this. As the guard stepped aside to make the call, the vast mansion suddenly felt less welcoming and more like a place where decisions were made that could alter lives without warning. Jonathan looked at them steadily and said that transparency protected everyone. Emily nodded, though inside she wondered whether honesty would still feel noble once it was placed under official scrutiny. The word transparency echoed in Emily's mind long after Jonathan Whitmore spoke it, and as the guard finished the brief call to local authorities, the air inside the mansion felt heavier than before. Jonathan explained that because the watch was insured and formally reported missing the previous night, documentation of its recovery was required to close the report properly. His tone was steady, almost instructional, as if he were outlining a business procedure, rather than addressing two young women standing far outside his world. Emily nodded, understanding the logic even as anxiety tightened in her chest. She had never spoken to a police officer about anything beyond routine neighborhood questions, and the thought of being formally questioned inside a billionaire's estate made her palms damp inside her gloves. Lily stood straighter beside her, though her pale face revealed the strain of the moment. Minutes passed slowly. A staff member offered them water in tall crystal glasses, which Emily accepted politely, careful not to spill a drop on the immaculate floor. Jonathan remained composed, observing them with quiet intensity. He asked about their sanitation route, about how long they had been working, about whether they attended school. The questions were not unkind, but they were probing, as if he were piecing together a broader picture of who they were beyond this single act. Emily answered honestly, explaining that she had graduated high school the previous spring and had postponed community college to help at home. Lily mentioned she was in 9th grade and worked mornings before classes began. Jonathan listened without interruption. When distant sirens briefly sounded and then faded as a patrol car pulled discreetly to the curb outside the estate, Lily's fingers trembled for just a second before she steadied herself. Emily noticed and gently squeezed her hand. 2 officers were escorted inside, professional and calm, their presence procedural rather than confrontational. Jonathan presented the watch and explained the circumstances. The officers asked Emily and Lily to recount the discovery once more, comparing their words to the security footage already reviewed. Emily spoke clearly, refusing to let fear distort the truth. After several minutes that felt far longer, one officer nodded and confirmed that the report would reflect voluntary return with no indication of wrongdoing. Relief did not come as celebration. It arrived quietly, like a breath finally released. Jonathan thanked the officers and watched as they departed, then turned back to the sisters with an expression no longer guarded, but contemplative, as if something inside him had shifted in ways he had not expected. After the officers left and the formalities were complete, the grand entry hall seemed quieter than before, as if the house itself were listening. Jonathan Whitmore dismissed the remaining staff with a subtle gesture, leaving only the 3 of them beneath the chandelier's steady glow. He placed the watch carefully into the inner pocket of his suit jacket, not with relief, but with something that resembled reverence. Emily sensed that whatever this object represented to him went far beyond money. He looked at them differently now, less as variables in a problem and more as people standing in front of him. He asked about their mother without preamble, his tone softer but still direct. Emily hesitated for only a moment before answering truthfully that their mother had been ill for months and that medical bills had been difficult. Lily added quietly that they worked mornings before school to help cover expenses. Jonathan absorbed this information without visible reaction, but his eyes lingered on the frayed edges of Emily's sleeves and the thinness of Lily's coat. He walked toward a wide window overlooking the manicured lawn stretching across several acres, sunlight glinting off a fountain in the distance. For a long moment he said nothing, his reflection faint against the glass. Then he turned back and offered them a substantial financial reward for their honesty, naming a figure large enough to erase hospital debts and secure their immediate future. The amount landed in the air like something unreal. Lily's eyes widened instinctively, but she did not speak. Emily felt her heart pound as the number echoed in her mind, equal to more than a year of their combined earnings. Yet she also felt the quiet weight of her earlier promise. She thanked him respectfully, but said that accepting money for doing what was right did not feel right to her. Jonathan studied her face carefully, searching for hesitation, for calculation, for any sign that pride was disguising need. There was none. Only steady resolve. Lily nodded in agreement, though it was clear the decision cost her something. A faint crease formed between Jonathan's brows, not in frustration, but in contemplation. He lowered the offer without withdrawing his attention, as if the refusal itself had revealed more about them than acceptance ever could. In the stillness that followed, the balance between wealth and integrity shifted in ways none of them fully understood yet. Jonathan Whitmore did not argue when Emily refused the money, but the silence that followed carried more weight than any negotiation. He walked slowly toward a long console table against the wall and rested his hand on its polished surface as if steadying himself. For a man accustomed to closing multi-million-dollar deals with a single signature, the quiet rejection of his offer unsettled him in a way he did not immediately understand. He asked them why they would choose struggle over relief when relief had just been placed within reach. Emily answered carefully that relief earned through compromise would not feel like relief at all. She explained that if they accepted payment for returning something that never belonged to them, it would turn a simple act of honesty into a transaction. Lily added that their mother always said integrity should not have a price tag attached. Jonathan absorbed their words without interruption. Outside the tall windows, the fountain continued its steady rhythm, water rising and falling in precise arcs that mirrored the discipline of his life. Yet inside him, something felt less structured. He had built his empire on calculated risks and measurable returns, on the belief that every action carried a definable value. Standing before him were two young women who operated by a different currency entirely. He asked about their plans for the future, about college, about what they hoped to become beyond the sanitation route that began before sunrise each day. Emily admitted she had once dreamed of studying engineering, but had postponed it indefinitely to help at home. Lily spoke quietly about wanting to become a teacher one day. Jonathan listened, his expression no longer guarded, but conflicted. He realized that offering cash had been the easiest solution, a way to resolve the situation quickly and restore balance on his terms. Their refusal forced him to confront a different possibility, one that required thought rather than generosity alone. He stepped closer again, his voice lower now, and told them that he respected their decision. However, he added that respect did not eliminate responsibility. He believed that when someone demonstrated extraordinary character, it deserved acknowledgement in a form that preserved dignity rather than undermined it. Emily felt uncertainty ripple through her, unsure what that meant. Lily looked from her sister to the billionaire, sensing that the conversation had shifted into unfamiliar territory. The tension in the room no longer revolved around suspicion or reward, but around something deeper, a decision forming quietly that could alter the direction of all three of their lives. Jonathan Whitmore stood in silence for a long moment after speaking about responsibility, and for the first time since they had stepped into the mansion, the confidence that usually surrounded him seemed to thin. He reached into his suit jacket and removed the watch again, holding it not as an object of wealth, but as something fragile. His voice changed when he spoke next, losing its corporate precision and gaining something more human. He told them the watch had belonged to his wife, Margaret, a gift he had given her on their 20th anniversary. The engraved date marked the last year they had celebrated together, before illness took her unexpectedly. He explained that the night before he had found the watch in a drawer while clearing out personal items he had avoided for years. In a moment of frustration and unresolved grief, he had ordered staff to dispose of several boxes without looking inside them carefully. By the time he realized the watch was gone, the trash had already been collected. As he described it, his steady composure fractured slightly, not into tears, but into something rawer, a confession he had not intended to share. Emily listened without interrupting, feeling the weight of his words settle differently now. Lily's eyes softened as she imagined losing the only person who made a house feel like home. Jonathan admitted that when the watch was reported missing, he assumed someone had taken advantage of the situation. It was easier, he said, to believe in greed than to confront his own carelessness. He looked at them directly, and acknowledged that they had preserved the last tangible reminder of the woman who had stood beside him before success consumed most of his time. The mansion around them suddenly felt less grand and more hollow, like a monument built to impress the world while hiding private absence. Emily felt her throat tighten, not because of the wealth surrounding them, but because grief sounded the same, no matter how large the house was. Jonathan took a slow breath and said that their decision to return the watch without demand had forced him to confront not only their integrity, but his own distance from the values Margaret had cherished. He admitted that for years, he had equated providing financially with loving completely. Standing before him were two young women who had almost nothing and yet possessed something he had nearly misplaced. The tension in the room shifted from negotiation to revelation, and in that vulnerable space, the true weight of the moment began to unfold. Jonathan remained still after revealing the story behind the watch, as if speaking Margaret's name aloud had shifted something fragile inside him. The grand hall no longer felt imposing, but strangely intimate, like a private room exposed to daylight for the first time in years. He walked toward a narrow hallway and returned with a framed photograph, placing it gently on the marble table between them. The picture showed a smiling woman standing beside him on a beach at sunset, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her eyes bright with warmth. Emily noticed how different he looked in that image, less guarded, less burdened by responsibility. Lily leaned forward slightly, studying the photograph with quiet empathy. Jonathan explained that Margaret had believed strongly in simple decency, in small choices that defined a person more than achievements ever could. He admitted that after she passed, he buried himself in expansion projects, acquisitions, and public appearances, convincing himself that success could silence grief. The watch had become a symbol he could not bear to confront, and discarding it in frustration had been easier than facing the memories it carried. As he spoke, his voice lost the edge of authority and gained something closer to regret. Emily felt a shift inside herself as well. She had come prepared to defend their honesty, not to witness vulnerability from a man whose life seemed untouchable. Jonathan looked at them and said that seeing two young women from circumstances far different than his own choose integrity without expectation had unsettled him in the best possible way. He confessed that wealth had taught him to anticipate negotiation, not sacrifice. In returning the watch, they had restored more than an object. They had restored a piece of perspective he did not realize he had misplaced. Lily's eyes glistened slightly, not from pity, but from recognition that loss did not discriminate by income or address. The silence that followed was no longer tense, but reflective. Jonathan placed the photograph back into the hallway carefully, then returned to stand before them with renewed clarity in his posture. The decision forming within him was no longer about compensation or procedure. It was about honoring what Margaret had valued and acknowledging what these two sisters had demonstrated without asking for applause. In that moment, the path forward began to take shape, not as charity, but as something far more deliberate. Jonathan's gaze lingered on Emily and Lily for a moment longer, as if he was still weighing the depth of their actions, the quiet strength that had led them here. He took a slow breath, and then spoke, his tone firm yet warm. He said that he could not in good conscience let them leave without doing something more, something that reflected the true value of what they had done. Emily tensed for a moment, expecting another offer of money, but instead Jonathan's next words caught her off guard. He said that he would personally ensure that their mother's medical bills were taken care of, but not with a check or a handout. He would arrange for a scholarship for Emily to attend the local community college and study engineering, the path she had once dreamed of but could not afford. For Lily, he would help secure an internship at a nearby school, a place where she could work with children, just as she had hoped. Jonathan explained that it was not just about the watch or the moment of honesty, but about their potential and the future he believed they deserved. Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. She had never expected anything like this, and the thought of having a chance to pursue her dreams a chance she had almost given up on, was overwhelming. Lily looked at her sister, her eyes wide, processing the magnitude of what Jonathan was offering. It wasn't just financial relief. It was an opportunity to change their lives, to step into a world they had never thought possible. Jonathan's voice softened as he spoke about the importance of choices, of doing what was right, even when it seemed like the hardest path. He said that Margaret, his late wife, had always believed in the power of education, in the idea that knowledge could change a person's circumstances, and that was the legacy he wanted to continue. Emily and Lily exchanged a glance, both of them struggling to find the right words. Finally, Emily spoke, her voice steady but filled with emotion. She said that they had not returned the watch to receive anything in return. It was simply the right thing to do. But the opportunity Jonathan was offering was something neither of them had expected, and they would not take it lightly. She thanked him, not just for the chance, but for seeing them as more than their circumstances. Jonathan nodded, a small smile forming on his lips, and for the first time, Emily saw a man who had learned something, not from the wealth he had accumulated, but from the honesty of two girls who had nothing to give but their integrity. The mansion around them seemed less like a fortress, and more like a place where change could begin, not just for them, but for Jonathan as well. The next few weeks were a blur of new beginnings for Emily and Lily. The scholarship for Emily was finalized, and she enrolled in community college with a sense of purpose that had been absent from her life for years. She found herself sitting in classrooms surrounded by people who, like her, were determined to carve out a future. It was overwhelming at first, but with each passing day, her confidence grew. Lily started her internship at the local school, working with children and helping in classrooms. She had always known she wanted to be a teacher, and now for the first time she felt like her dreams were within reach. The days passed quickly as both sisters settled into their new routines, balancing their studies, work, and the growing sense of possibility that filled their lives. As they drove home from school each evening, the truck seemed a little less old, a little less like the symbol of everything they had struggled against. Their mother's health slowly improved with the financial help Jonathan had arranged for her care, and the weight of constant worry was replaced with something lighter: hope. Emily and Lily would never forget the moment they had walked into Jonathan Whitmore's mansion, feeling like two strangers in a world they didn't belong to. But the truth was, that moment had changed everything for them. Not because of the offer Jonathan had made, but because of the lesson they had learned from their own choices. They had not returned the watch to gain anything. They had returned it because it was the right thing to do. And in doing so, they had received more than they could have ever imagined. Jonathan continued to keep in touch, offering guidance and checking in on their progress, but he never again spoke of money or material things. Instead, he talked about potential, about how integrity had a way of shaping the future, how small acts of kindness and honesty could ripple out into the world and change it. Emily and Lily knew that they would never be the same after that day. They had been given more than just a chance to improve their lives. They had been given a new perspective on what truly mattered. They were no longer just two girls from a trailer park. They were young women with a future, with purpose, with hope. And as they looked out the window of their modest home each evening, the setting sun now seemed to promise something they had never thought possible: a life they had earned, not just by the work of their hands, but by the strength of their hearts. Months passed, and with each new day, Emily and Lily's lives transformed in ways they had never imagined. The weight of constant worry about their mother's health, about bills piling up, and about the uncertainty of their future had slowly lifted. Instead, they found themselves waking up each day with a sense of purpose. Emily's classes were challenging, but they were also exciting. She had discovered a passion for engineering that she never fully realized she had before. Each lecture, each assignment felt like a step forward, and she no longer thought of herself as someone who was just trying to survive. She was someone building a future. Lily's work at the school had given her a newfound confidence, too. Her time spent helping children, teaching them the things she had always loved, was fulfilling in a way she hadn't expected. She came home each evening with stories of students she had helped, moments of success, that reminded her why she had chosen to pursue teaching. Their mother, too, began to improve. The relief they had received from Jonathan's assistance had given her the chance to focus on healing. There were still tough days, but there were more good days now, and for the first time in a long while, their home felt more like a place of hope than of struggle. Emily and Lily never spoke much about the moment they had returned the watch. It wasn't something they felt the need to revisit. They both knew in their hearts that what they had done had been the right thing. They had chosen integrity over everything else, and in doing so they had created a future for themselves that wasn't defined by the struggles of their past. Jonathan remained in contact, but it was different now. His messages were less about the material offers he had extended and more about checking in on their progress, offering advice when they needed it, or simply sharing a word of encouragement. It was clear to Emily and Lily that he had come to see them differently, not as charity cases, but as individuals with a future and a drive to create something for themselves. The mansion, the wealth, the life Jonathan had once represented, now felt distant. It was no longer a world they felt out of place in, but rather a place where they had been shown the kind of respect and kindness that had changed everything for them. As the months went by, Emily and Lily found themselves thinking less about what they lacked and more about what they could create. The work they did, the education they received, and the future they were building felt more meaningful than anything they had ever hoped for. They were no longer waiting for something to change their lives. They were making it happen themselves. One Saturday afternoon, a few months after the scholarship had been finalized and life had found a new rhythm, Emily stood in front of a classroom with a chalkboard in hand, teaching her first official class as part of a work-study program at the community college. The room was small, but filled with eager faces, all students with different backgrounds, but a shared desire to learn. As she wrote out the equations on the board, she could feel a strange sense of fulfillment settle in her chest, a sense of purpose that she had never truly known before. This wasn't just about a degree or the promise of a future. This was her making a difference in the way that had once seemed impossible. Lily was in the school library that same afternoon, her desk littered with books about childhood development and education strategies. She had become an invaluable asset to the teachers she worked with, and her passion for helping kids was evident in everything she did. The children she worked with had begun to thrive under her care, and she had earned the respect of her colleagues. At home, their mother, who had fought so hard to get better, was cooking a simple dinner. The house, once a place filled with worry and uncertainty, now felt like a home filled with warmth and life. The old truck that they had once relied on to carry their burdens had long since been replaced, not with a new car, but with something that felt like it had come from the work of their own hands, earned through determination, not given away. As Emily returned home that evening, she found Lily sitting on the porch, looking out at the sky as the sun began to set. They had both changed so much since the day they had returned the watch, and it was a change that went deeper than just their circumstances. It was a change in how they viewed themselves and the world around them. Emily sat beside her sister, both of them looking out at the horizon, not with the weight of uncertainty that had once defined their lives, but with the knowledge that they had the power to shape their futures. They had not only found the strength to rise above their past, but had discovered the strength to move forward with purpose. Their journey had not been easy, but it had been theirs to make. And as the evening sky darkened and the stars began to appear, Emily and Lily both knew that their story was only just beginning, and that whatever came next, they were ready to face it together. Months later, Emily stood in front of a new class, teaching the very subject she had once dreamed of pursuing. The classroom with its chalkboard and desks felt less like a place of work and more like a space where she could create something lasting, something that would shape the future in small but meaningful ways. She had gone from a girl who barely believed in herself to a young woman who now taught others to believe in their own potential. Lily, too, had found her calling, Each day she worked with students, helping them learn and grow. She found herself more connected to her passion for teaching. The once overwhelming challenges of life had now been replaced with moments of quiet accomplishment, and she could see the difference she was making in the lives of those around her. At home, their mother had made a full recovery, and the house once filled with uncertainty and fear was now a place of warmth and love. The bills, once a constant source of stress, were manageable, and the days felt lighter. The truck that had carried so many burdens was no longer a symbol of their struggles, but a reminder of how far they had come. As the evening sun set on another day, Emily and Lily found themselves sitting together on the porch once more, looking at the horizon. They had faced hardships that seemed insurmountable at one point, but now, with the promise of a future ahead, they knew that whatever came next, they were ready for it. They had not just survived, they had thrived. And together, they knew they would continue to build a life full of possibilities, one step at a time. As Emily and Lily continued their paths, they often found themselves reflecting on the journey that had led them here, the quiet moments of realization that came when they least expected them. Emily stood before her engineering class, now more confident in her role as a teacher, guiding her students with the same patience and understanding that had been shown to her. Her hands, once rough from hard work, now moved over blueprints with the steady precision of someone who knew the value of effort, of persistence. Lily, too, had blossomed into a young woman who had learned to find strength in every challenge. Her days spent helping children and her nights spent studying for her teaching degree had begun to shape a future she had only dreamed of. Every day felt like a step forward, and the uncertainty that once clouded her future now seemed distant. Their mother, who had been frail and weak not so long ago, was now more active, taking pride in the small things around the house. There was still a long way to go, but with each passing day their lives became more rooted in a sense of stability and hope. The truck, which had been a constant reminder of their struggles, now carried the weight of their progress, not as a symbol of hardship, but as a testament to the work they had put in to get here. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Emily and Lily sat together on the porch again, looking out at the world they were now a part of. They had come a long way from the day they had returned the watch. The lessons they had learned, the strength they had found within themselves, and the unexpected opportunities that had come their way had reshaped their lives. They knew that the future was still uncertain, but for the first time they faced it without fear, knowing that no matter what happened, they were prepared to face it together. It had been a year since the moment Emily and Lily had returned the watch, and as they sat together on the porch of their home one evening, they reflected on how much had changed. The weight of uncertainty that had once clouded their lives was now replaced with a sense of direction and purpose. Emily had finished her first year of college, and her dream of becoming an engineer was no longer just a distant hope. It was real, something she was building day by day. Lily had completed her internship and was now working part-time at a local school, learning the ropes of teaching and preparing for her own classroom one day. Their mother, still recovering but stronger than she had been in years, smiled as she watched her daughters, knowing that the future was brighter than it had ever seemed before. The truck, which had carried them through the hardest moments of their lives, now sat in the driveway, still dependable but no longer a symbol of struggle. It was just a part of their story, a reminder of the work they had put in to get where they were. Emily and Lily knew that life would never be perfect, but it was theirs to shape. They had learned that the greatest gifts were not the ones given to them, but the ones they had earned through their actions and their choices. As the sun set that evening, casting a warm glow over the world around them, they both felt a quiet sense of pride. They had come a long way from the day they had returned the watch, but more than that, they had found a strength in themselves they never knew existed. And as they looked toward the future, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together with the same integrity and determination that had brought them this far. Did this story move your soul? Share your feelings in the comments and rate it from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Then tap the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Click the end screen to watch another heartfelt video. See you in the next story.